We probably should have gone over how we were going to open this. that's
Uh,
that's a
let's just do it
it's only
live.
slightly important, Um, so yeah, welcome to the DC Shoot Off podcast. This is episode 2. We're hopefully going to be a little bit smoother this time. Find us on YouTube podcasts, Spotify podcasts, and hopefully by the time this episode airs on Apple Podcast. I'm Sam Morse,
I'm Tyler Prince.
and don't forget, it's all play.
Nice.
That wasn't terrible. That wasn't
No.
terrible.
You
Okay.
did all the talking. It was perfect.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I resisted the urge to be like, lower your expectations. Everyone lower their expectations and we'll all have a good time.
and I think that's how we're starting back from the open. Nice. So yesterday was by the time this podcast goes out, yesterday was Memorial Day. So we do want to definitely kind of acknowledge that and you know remember both Tyler and I are veterans, and we definitely want to remember those that we've lost and kind of think about those that have lost more than others. So definitely this is one of those times where if you have a veteran in your life, if you haven't reached out to them in a little bit, this is a good time to check up on them. Memorial Day can be really tough for a lot of us, especially when we are fresh out of the military. I know the first Memorial Day after I left the Air Force was really tough. And ironically, I ended up working that day because I happened to have a job at a mall, and that was tough. So definitely take care of those around you. Appreciate those who are still around. Remember those we've lost, and take care of those who are still alive. So from when this podcast is going on, I'm having to kind of check myself because we're recording this on the 19th. So last weekend for now it'll be 2 weekends ago when this actually airs. But we had the Aurora, and unless you were living under a rock, away from all news, social media, and everything, you probably saw a few images from it. A couple people, not just a couple people, basically everybody around the world that wasn't inside the tropics was posting photos, videos, etc. Even cell phones were capturing pretty amazing imagery of it. I don't know if you guys saw it in DC. I think it was kind of cloudy there from what I heard.
Yeah, it was pretty. The first night was just like a thunderstorm. And
Oh,
then, and then the second night, we were going to drive a few hours north to try and see it, but it was a Sunday and we ended up not going.
aw, that's too bad.
Yeah. We're
Luckily
old.
things were actually pretty clear here in Utah. Utah is a fantastic state for astrophotography.
Yeah.
Partially because we tend to have fairly clear skies. We're at a pretty high elevation ourselves, so we are the air is actually a little thinner, a little clearer. And I ended up losing a lot of sleep last weekend going out. And I thought this might be a good opportunity to talk about low light photography, low light videography, a few different things, and really help anybody who's out there who's wanting to get better at that sort of stuff. Because yeah, Tyler, have you ever needed to take imagery in low light, video or photo or otherwise?
Yeah,
Just a few
a
times.
lot actually. The one that stands out to me is I got sent up to Alaska in February. So we only had about 7 to 8 hours of daylight, and we were filming a whole lot longer than that for this Northern Warfare Training Center story I did.
Yeah.
So a friend actually lent me his A7S II, and if I hadn't had that, I don't know
Nice.
how I would have shot it, because
Yeah.
even the night stuff with that is pretty grainy.
Yeah.
Um, but honestly, with shooting low light, I've kind of just given up on caring if it's grainy or not. I just care if it's usable.
It's funny you say that because one of the points that I was kind of going to go over is embrace the grain,
Yeah,
because sometimes it works. It totally
absolutely.
works. I was filming special operations earlier this year, back in February, and it was basically the culmination of training for these special operators, and it was mostly at night because they were doing um, they're using sim rounds and blanks and things like that, but they were trying to train as they fight. So most of the stuff that they were doing was at night and with night vision, and we wanted to film this cinematically, so we didn't necessarily want to film using night vision, not that we had any to work with anyway. And so literally we had the light provided by the moon, and that was it, in many cases. And it was brutal, but we managed to luck out, and it was actually a full moon. So and I happened to pick up a lens that was it's an f 0.95, and that plus the FX3 with the larger photo sites and stupid high ISOs, we actually got some of the coolest imagery that I've ever captured that would not have been possible if we weren't just squeezing every inch of light and potential out of our equipment as humanly possible. Um,
Yeah, and you said you shot with the FX3 on that?
FX. So during the day we were shooting with red Komodos, and
Mm,
as soon as the sun went down, we switched to FX3s,
nice.
because the Komodos gave us more color, more depth, more stuff to work with during the day.
Sure.
We also had a set of Laowa nanomorphs um, that let us shoot some of that with the pretty anamorphic lens flares and stuff like that. But
Hmm.
those cameras were basically useless as soon as the sun went down. They need light.
Yeah,
Reds in general need light. The newer ones are definitely better. We were
for sure.
surprised at what we were getting out of them, but they do not keep up with an FX3 at night, and especially an FX3 with an f 0.95 lens.
Yeah. I haven't had the opportunity to shoot with the 3, but I have shot with the FX6, and I've done the
Nice.
high base ISO, like the 128,000. Yeah, I think
Yeah, so
128,000
you
or
can
whatever.
actually go higher than that.
Yeah,
That's something that we learned. We found that as long as you're exposing correctly,
right.
um, not underexposing, ISO 64,000 is more than usable.
I
I
was just gonna say 128 it was grainy, but I could see what I was shooting, and it was
mhm.
after the grade, it looked pretty good. So,
Why
how do
would
you go
not?
about ensuring when you're shooting in low light that you are exposing correctly? Because
So there's
especially when you're shooting S log, if you underexpose,
Yeah,
you're
S-Log, yeah,
you're done.
do not underexpose S-Log, and especially if it's not a current generation, you actually want to err on the side of overexposing.
Yep.
You really do not want to underexpose S-Log. So there's a few different things you can do, and I'm going to try to include photo on all of this as well, because this is the DC Shoot Off, not the DC Video Shoot Off podcast. We're trying to be all inclusive here. And there's a few things you can do. Number one is light. Um, really adding more light to your scene can really help, especially on the photo side. The ability to bring in flash to the equation um, is especially awesome, because you can show a subject foreground that is sharp, because the flash is momentary. It effectively gives you a fast shutter speed on that foreground, and then drag out that shutter to get a properly exposed background. And I've done a few portraits like this. I'm going to put one up on here. And for those of you that are listening, hopefully on Apple Podcasts, because this is going to be hopefully going live on there here pretty soon, just know that we are going to be showing some visuals with this. We are going to do our best to describe them while we are talking about them. But for full effect, do realize that we've got video versions of this podcast on YouTube podcasts and Spotify podcasts, so you can actually watch them there and ignore them when there isn't something on screen.
Several minutes later.
Too many photos in my Photos app. I mean, it's great because I can find anything, pretty much. The downside is everything is there that I have to then wade through.
I was going to say, how long does it take?
Had to look for some stuff there for a minute. So I did this group photo down in Socorro, New Mexico, and we set up a flash on a stand with a remote trigger. Godox, if you're curious. And this let us get a sharp foreground with a fully exposed background. You can actually see the core of the Milky Way in the background there. You can see a bit of motion blur on the telescope. That's a site that basically tracks deep space objects that could collide with satellites and things like that. They're basically looking at space junk and tracking it. But yeah, this let us do a portrait, which normally if you do a 30-second exposure with people, it's going to look terrible because they're going to be a blurry mess. And even with this one, if you look closely, there's kind of like a black shade behind. But for the most part, you can see us, you can see people, and it looks good. So yeah, I mean, Flash can be a really great way to do it. There's also light painting. So if you have a stationary object and you want to get better light on it, you can literally just walk around with a light and light it. So you can do something like this that I shot this past weekend or 2 weekends ago when this actually posts. I'm going to be doing a lot of time math during this, but for this, I've got a 4-foot light tube, an Amaran T4C, and I put it into a color chase mode, which just cycles through all the different colors. And then I shined it on the truck and was able to show the truck with, light across the whole thing. And as I moved the light across, that actually let me, it modulated the color, which created a rainbow effect across the truck. And then of course, you can see that I kind of ran behind the truck with the light as well to get some light behind the truck. And the whole exposure was 30 seconds long, which gave us a great exposure on the Milky Way core behind, using that f/0.95 lens that I love so much. And it's a fun effect. It took quite a few tries, I think at least 10 tries, to get the light exactly the way I wanted, to get the start of the rainbow at the end of the rainbow correct. The guy who owns the truck, he's actually a local friend of mine who is also one of the heads of an organization called Dragon Dads, which is all about like supporting LGBT youth. They're dads that get together and help other dads navigate the challenges of having LGBT youth, which is really cool. So having a rainbow truck just made his day. It was actually a lot of fun to put that one together, but it really kind of shows you how light painting, just leaving that shutter open, make sure you got a tripod. Tripods are very, very important for stuff like that. You're not going to be able to handhold a 30-second exposure, but it can be a lot of fun and very creative to kind of walk around with a light. There's examples out there of people light painting where they even do animations or draw words or shapes. So there's so much cool stuff that you can do with long exposures and light painting. And you can even do a combination of flashes. You can do a combination of flashes and light painting and all these other things. And even though I used a wireless trigger in that portrait, you don't necessarily need a wireless trigger to do it. You can actually do it with just manually triggering the flash, because the shutter's open. It doesn't matter when that flash goes off. It really doesn't. So lots of cool stuff there. So that's kind of right off the bat. That's uh, kind of a technique and such that you can use for photo. And then we kind of mentioned that you can do animation with doing repeated photos and turn that into video. But there's also time lapse. So time lapse, that's a way that you can actually get video out of low light, and you can show stars moving across. You can show various things over time. That's what time lapse is really great for. Tyler, you're probably familiar with the 180-degree shutter angle stuff, right?
Right.
Basically, if I'm shooting 24 frames per second, you want a shutter speed of
48.
1/48th of a second. So they say double your number, double the number of your shutter or double the number of your frame rate to get your shutter. I'm here to tell you that's not quite right. I try to get people thinking half the duration. So 24 frames per second, one frame represents 1/24th of a second, right?
Hmm.
Well, we want that shutter to be open for half that duration because we want some motion blur, but we don't want it to be mushy. We want it to have just the right amount of motion blur, which is half of that duration. That's what looks normal to us. Well, when we get into time lapse, that's where that whole double the number kind of breaks down, because if I say we're shooting a 2-second interval, so we're shooting one frame every 2 seconds, usually people will say, oh, so you want a 4-second shutter speed, right? It's not physically possible. You can't hold a shutter open for 4 seconds every 2. It doesn't work that way. So if you think half the duration, then it makes sense. For the higher frame rates, you're going from 24 frames per second to 1/48th of a second, because 1/48th is half of 1/24th, because fractions. When you get into time lapse, it makes even more sense, because if you're shooting a 2-second interval, you're getting a 1-second shutter speed. So
Right.
that makes things a lot easier to figure out. And there's some leeway, different types of time lapses. It's sometimes better to have a slower shutter speed, really drag that shutter speed. Sometimes it's better to be a little bit choppier. And when you're time lapsing different subjects, there are frame rates that work better. So people, you generally want to be around 1 to 2 frames per second. Otherwise, they just turn into a blurry chaos. 1 to 2 second intervals will give you, you'll see the people better. You'll see what they're doing, and it just looks like ants in fast motion. Works even better if you're using like a tilt shift effect. But get into clouds, 5 to 10 seconds can look really good depending on how fast the clouds are moving. If you want to show the movement of the sun, where you see either shadows moving across the ground or the sun moving across the sky, then you're wanting to be closer to like 30-second or even 60-second intervals. And nighttime time lapses are very similar, because you're seeing stars move across the sky. I found anywhere from 50 and 20-second intervals up to 60-second intervals all look really good depending on the effect that you're going for. So, which is beneficial, because that gives you the shutter speeds that you need to be able to expose. If you're out in dark sky areas, 30 seconds is gold. That gives you tons of exposure time. That lets you really see kind of the intricacies of, especially the core of the Milky Way, which is out this time of the year. You should be able to see it just after midnight right about now. As we progress more into the summer, you'll see it more and more, looking to the south.
So when you're doing like an astral time lapse, watching stars go by.
Yeah.
Are you trying to get trails with it? Or
Yes. So, yeah, they're astrophotography and astro time lapses have two very different goals. With astrophotography for a still image, you do not want star trails. You want it to be a little bit faster of a shutter speed, and you'll do what's called stacking, where you line up images in post and stack them together, and it averages out the the noise, and you end up with a much cleaner image. So when I was out during that whole Aurora weekend, that's a way that I can not have to do time math. The Aurora weekend. We'll refer to it as the Aurora weekend. When I was out there, I was with two friends, Drew, the one with the truck, and his friend, and they were all about like faster shutter speeds. They didn't want to go past like 8 seconds for their shutter. Because they wanted just crisp point stars that they could line up in post and clean up the noise that way. Whereas I was like, I'm doing time lapses. I want to drag that shutter. So it is interesting seeing those two different perspectives, but both get cool stuff. It all depends on what you're going for. So we're talking about star trails as well. There's another reason to drag the shutter, even if you're going for a still image. And you can do this for time lapse as well, but you can actually do a star trail image. So star trails, as the stars move across, of course, it's not the stars that are moving, it's the Earth that's moving, right?
Right.
So they turn in a very specific way and all in the same direction, around either the North Star or the south. There is actually a Southern Star. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but the North Star is Polaris. Now, the traditional way to do this is to just open the shutter for just a ridiculously long period of time. And you can do that. It is possible to get a cable release and leave that shutter open for an hour or two at a time. But that tends to do bad things to electronic sensors. They're just not meant to be left open for that long, to be activated for that long. You tend to build up noise, but also you end up accumulating light pollution as well. So you don't have as much contrast in the final image. I've done images like that. It doesn't work as well as you would like it to. Thankfully, there is software now for that. And basically, it will stack the images and look for any point that looks like a star and add it to the base image. And the software is free. I'm sure there's multiple software types out there. But the one that I use the most, it's called StarStax. And it's StarStax with an X. I'll put an image up of what that is, and I'll try to link to it in the description. But StarStax, it's free software. In fact, the license on it specifically says we want you to use this for commercial productions, which I've never seen free software go that far to be like, yes, please use this for commercial work. So it's free to use on just about anything. And the cool thing is, not only can you stack images and get star trails, and it's got a few different modes. There's YouTube videos and YouTube tutorials out there that will show you how to use a lot of this stuff, but you can do a full-fledged star trail image, but you can also do something that they call comet mode. And comet mode essentially dims the older images as it progresses. And the coolest part about that one is you can tell it, okay, each time you add an image, output the current result to an image. And then you end up with a time lapse that is trailing the stars. So you end up with something like this, where as the star trails move across the sky, it is dimming the old ones, and you end up with this kind of streaking, cool effect that works really well for time lapses, but it also works well as a final still image too. If you're curious, this is Polaris Hall at the Air Force Academy. Polaris Hall is where they teach all of their character and leadership classes. And they have this whole kind of mantra where it is, they're being guided by the North Star, Polaris. And so the entire building is built to line up with Polaris. Of course, I don't know if the people who came up with the idea realized that Polaris doesn't actually stay put in the sky. It wobbles just a little bit. But the thought is cool. And so I shot this time lapse to kind of accentuate the fact that it is actually lined up with Polaris.
Yeah. Very cool.
And in fact,
it's a very 3D effect to it.
Yeah, definitely.
I've done, it didn't look as good as that, but I've stacked images, a time lapse in After Effects before to get that star trail effect. But it doesn't do the thing where it gets dimmer over time, so it just kind of gets soft.
I'm sure there's some ways, I forget the name of the effect, but I want to say DaVinci Resolve has something that does something kind of similar. I haven't played with it yet, but I mean, free program. And it works at full resolution, and you can set it, let it turn away at the images for a bit, and come back later. I did another angle from it as well. This really kind of showcases that whole spinning around Polaris thing. And of course, I'm making gestures while my camera is offline. We're trying something a little different this particular one, this particular episode. So I fully expect that these next couple of episodes, there's going to be some rough moments.
That's what editing is for, Sam.
Huh?
That's what editing is for, to cut me out when I'm cursing and cut around when you're...
last time. I just bleeped you. I just bleeped you last time. So, but in any case, yeah. So star trails are cool. You can do them as still images or as videos. And in fact, the star trail video that I showed earlier, I even went an extra step that maybe was unnecessary, but I essentially shot that as an HDR. So I shot it with, I used a cable release, or wireless cable release, I should say. And that's basically just a device. You can get them for $30 on Amazon, and it's got a little module that hooks into your camera. So you got to get one that is compatible with your camera specifically. And it's got a wireless remote, and you can program it to hold the shutter down for a set period of time every so many seconds. And it's got a lot of different modes, but for that one, I had it hold down for, I think, 36 seconds, wait 4 seconds, and then hold it down again. And what that let me do is program the camera to go into an auto bracketing mode, centered on, I think it was 4 seconds. And it would give me, by holding the shutter down, it would give me a half second, 4 second, and 30-second exposure all in one go. And because it was in the continuous bracketing mode, it would go through all 3 shots. And then the wireless trigger would essentially lift the trigger and then restart it again 4 seconds later. So that let me get all 3 types of exposures every 40 seconds, and then be able to say, okay, I'm going to use this part for the highlights, use this part for the sky. So the 30-second exposure, that was the sky. 4-second exposure was the building, because 30 seconds overexposed the building. Right. And then the half second honestly was kind of a throwaway. I didn't need that, but half second didn't really take away from my exposure time. So that was basically, I was basically just using the 4 second and the 30 second to be able to expose the sky and the ground separately, and then combine it all into one time lapse. So, yeah, it worked out kind of nicely.
You need a new co-host, bro. I'm not qualified to talk about this.
It's all good, man.
I'm just listening. I was with you with like 30 seconds. I was like, yeah, 30-second exposure here. And
Right.
then you're like, and then I stacked them. I was like, whoa. I would have just shot it in RAW and then fun around with it in post until it looked okay.
So I am glad that I did it. I probably could have exposed in such a way that I got both,
No, your
but
way's better.
but
I didn't even
yeah,
know that was an option.
the way that I did it 30 seconds was definitely overexposed on the building. I
Right.
could not recover those details enough. Now, if I had done like a 20-second exposure, might have been a different story. But
Mm-hmm.
30 seconds gave me a really clean sky and a really clean foreground with the 4 second exposures. So it worked out pretty well. But I mean, you saw
That's
from
cool.
the still image, I mean, that's properly exposed both in the sky and the ground. So that kind of demonstrates that, yes, it is possible to get it all in one shot. So did it have to be as difficult? Probably not. I'm glad that I tried it though, because that might work well for something in the future.
The extra steps are usually always worth it.
Or sometimes they're just extra steps.
I don't know. I've regret like not getting up at 4 a.m. to go shoot some time lapses because they're usable video in a pinch.
Yeah, I've definitely become that guy that, will just run some time lapses all over the place. So, getting back to the photo side, this method requires multiple photos, but in a different way. So we all know that the stars rotate, or really the Earth rotates, causing the stars to appear to rotate. So there's these things called equatorial mounts, also known as star trackers. And basically what this is a wedge. So this right here is a wedge, which puts this mounted at an angle. And the point of this is you basically set the wedge to be at the what they call altitude, the angle at which the North Star is. And then once you do that, get it all lined up, this particular piece, you might be able to see, oh, it's going to be really, really slow. Probably not going to see that. But this piece rotates. So you've got a few different speeds. You've got the speed of the sun, the moon, and the stars, as well as a half speed option. So what does that do? That lets you have you attach a camera to it, and the camera is locked onto a position in the sky, and it stays with it as the Earth rotates. So it's essentially counter-rotating with the Earth so that it can keep a portion of the sky perfectly in frame and not move. Now, there are less advanced versions. There are more advanced versions. The one that I have has a polar scope that lets you, really precisely line up the North Star, because as we just mentioned, the North Star, Polaris, isn't quite perfectly north. It does actually rotate ever so slightly. And so to get a perfect alignment, you do have to take into consideration where you are, what time it is, etc. So there are cheaper ones that don't have the whole polar scope. There are more expensive ones that will even do error correcting, where it has a secondary scope looking at other stars, and if it moves too much or too little, it error corrects and does all this stuff. But those are also really expensive. The one that I've got is about $400, which is more than a lot of people want to spend, but not as much as I would have expected, especially a while ago. But what that lets you do is shoot into deep space and get crazy long exposures, like 5-minute long exposures, and then stack those and get just incredible imagery. So the first time I did the whole stacking thing, this is the image that I got. That is the Orion Nebula. And I happened to be driving over to Nebraska for a friend's wedding, and was pulling a crazy overnighter. Just drove all through the night and stopped in Wyoming because it was a clear night. new moon, no moon was out or anything. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna try this whole stacking thing. And originally, I was trying to get Andromeda, the Andromeda Galaxy, but for whatever reason, I was having a tough time aligning it, and um, I saw Orion, the constellation, starting to rise. I'm like, you know what? I think there's a nebula in there. So I pointed the lens at that 600 millimeter. I was using a Sony 200 to 600 millimeter on loan from a friend, from Drew, and did 30-second exposures, and I think I got like 36 clean ones. So we're talking grand total like 15 minutes of exposure time. Granted, I was there for like 2 hours because I was futzing around with stuff, but um, we're talking not even half an hour of shooting. And when I stacked everything up in Photoshop, and we can go into depth of with how this works, but I'm really just trying to show people, hey, this is a possibility. But I stacked those up, and as soon as I did the averaging between the photos, and Photoshop can do all of this for you. You auto align, and then you make it into a smart object and set the blending mode to mean. Again, there's YouTube tutorials on stacking, and once it averaged out and that noise disappeared, I was hooked. Because that nebula is surprisingly big in the sky. In fact, if you're in a dark enough area, you can kind of sort of make it out if you know what you're looking at. But as soon as you point a camera at it, it pops. And that's so true about a lot of this astrophotography. Deep space astrophotography, I kind of liken to treasure hunting, because you look and you see stars, you see darkness, and if you're in a dark enough area, you start to see like the core of the Milky Way and things like that. But then you point a camera at it and do a long exposure, and all of a sudden there's so much more. So the one that really exemplifies this, because I'm a crazy person, if that wasn't already obvious. So everyone knows the Orion constellation, right? Orion's belt and all that stuff. Well, I pointed a camera at it for 3.5 hours with an 85 millimeter lens. And 85 millimeters, we're talking like a headshot portrait lens, not anything crazy telephoto. 85 millimeter for 3.5 hours. And granted, there's a lot of processing involved with this, but that's the image that I got. So that's Orion's belt in the middle. You can actually see the Orion Nebula in there as well. Bernard's Loop and everything.
It's wild, man.
Yeah. So this is all stuff that is just up there in the sky, too dim to see with the naked eye. But if you take photos of it, and even the photos, when I looked at the back of the camera, I'm like, crap, I don't know if I'm getting what I need to be able to get the image that I want. Because I knew in theory that all that stuff was in that photo. I just didn't know if I was getting enough exposure time to capture it. And there's a plugin that's for Photoshop and a program called PixInsight called Star Exterminator. Star and then X Terminator. And it's a paid app. I think it's like $80, but it will use AI to remove all the stars in your photo. And you may be like, well, why do I want to get rid of the stars? The whole point is the stars, right? Well, removing the stars, you can then take them into a separate layer in Photoshop. And you could edit the nebulosity and the stars separately. And that opens up all sorts of possibilities to be able to edit your photos more effectively. But as soon as I removed the stars off of that image, it was wild how much I could see. I honestly, I thought that I hadn't gotten it. And removing the stars, boom, I saw a hint of Bernard's Loop. I could see all these other little pieces throughout. And it's addictive. I never thought that I'd be one of these crazy people spending hours and hours shooting one photo out in the middle of nowhere. Because of course you need to be out in a dark sky area to get this. And
Yeah.
it's like, no way. There's no way I'm going to have the patience for that. And now I'm doing it pretty much every chance I get. Anytime that there's a new moon and clear skies, I'm trying to go out there and photograph something. And it's pretty cool because for most people, you can do it with whatever camera you've already got. You can, you don't have to have crazy lenses. And in fact, some of the cheaper lenses actually work better. One of astrophotographer's go-to lenses is the old Rokinon manual focus f2 135. That 135 millimeter works great for a lot of different subjects. It's crazy sharp for astrophotography, and it's manual focus, so you can just focus to what you need and not have to worry about autofocus motors screwing up halfway through. And a $400 tracker, and again, there's ones that are like $200 that actually work pretty decently, but $400 will get you a pretty good one.
I used to shoot time. Oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, it is a rabbit hole. I will warn anybody. It is a rabbit hole.
All I was going to say was when I used to shoot time lapses more, I like to use some old Nikon lenses I had that had manual apertures, because then you don't get any variation from the aperture opening and closing.
Yeah, with the with the Nikon DSLRs, that was a huge thing because the
flicker
you would get, because every time it took a photo, it would have to reset the aperture, because when the mirror was down, it would open up all the way, and it wasn't until you flipped it back up that it would close it down for the actual photo. So if you weren't shooting wide open, yeah, you would get a little bit of flicker from it. Thankfully, DaVinci Resolve has tools for that, but
it does. And Nikon's exposure smoothing is pretty good on their time lapses.
Yeah, and mirrorless cameras in general these days, they have the iris at whatever it is you're going to be shooting. So you don't have to worry about variation from shot to shot because it's just staying put. But I have had autofocus lenses, autofocus midway or creep or do something partway through a time lapse or during astrophotography. Astrophotography, it's always the worst because the changing temperature will actually change the focus distance as well. So you have to check it every like 30 minutes and be like, okay, is it still sharp? Cool. Keep going. If you don't check it every once in a while, you'll bring back your photos and realize that half of them are out of focus because the temperature dropped too much.
Ugh.
Yeah. Somehow I still do this,
so much
and like
stress
I've had
and so much like effort.
Yeah. I've had entire nights be a bust because something went wrong. I found out the hard way that I ended up getting the 200 to 600 millimeter and learned the hard way that below about 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it loses infinity focus. Not something you would expect. And not something that most people would care about because most of the things that you're photographing with that lens are not at infinity. They might be close to infinity. They might be, a few 100 feet away, but they're not at infinity. The things I photograph are at infinity, and the lens elements or whatever constrict just enough below 32 degrees Fahrenheit that it cannot focus in infinity. You put it all the way to infinity and it's still just a little bit soft on the stars. So there was a night that I wrapped hand warmers around the entire barrel of the lens, did everything I could do to keep it warm, and was getting it lined up because I wanted to photograph this nebula called the Casper the Friendly Ghost Nebula, M78, I think. And it was it's a dim nebula. It's a reflection nebula. So it took a while to find it in the lens, get focus on it, get everything lined up. And then of course, like I bumped something. So the polar alignment went off and I had to re-polar align. It was a mess. I finally get it all set up. And right as I'm getting ready to take my stack of images, it loses infinity focus after like an hour of fiddling with it in the dark and the cold. Yeah, that was a bad night. That was a bad night. So let's get back to video, because video is where you and I live. Say you're trying to do real-time video, because a lot of us are trying to do real-time video, to do doc work and things like that. So the big thing with most cameras is you want to have good exposure. The most of the noise when you get to higher ISOs is in your shadow area. And so underexposing is the death of an image. There's a few things you have to look out for. So, first off, use a LUT. If your camera has the ability to use a LUT, or your monitor has the ability to use a LUT, or you have a monitor that has the ability to use a LUT, use a LUT. Use a LUT, because it is going to just give you a better understanding of where your highlights and shadows are. You'll see them clipping. You'll see the shadows getting crushed. That really helps a lot. Tyler, I know you were talking about your disdain for not using LUTs, looking at log footage. Has that bit you in the past?
Yeah, definitely. Shooting Sony, not being able to use a LUT in S-Log3 is definitely. Thankfully, Neat Video's noise reduction is excellent, but it sucked.
Yeah, it helps video in general, because it also helps with like white balance and seeing how your lighting's looking.
Yeah, also it looks ugly, and I'd rather just look at it how it's going to be, sort of close to how it's going to be.
Yeah.
I would rather think I would rather think I had less information than I end up having in post than the other way around.
Yeah, and I actually have so I've got my FX3 set up. Let's see. Number 2. So
What the
I've got my camera set up with an A10
oh, hey,
mini.
it's me.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of behind the scenes. That's the teleprompter that I'm using with the iPad to be able to see what's going on. But I actually have the front record button to turn the LUT on or off, and it's not showing.
Yeah.
Several minutes later.
I'm dumb. You're gonna laugh when I tell you the reason. Yep, there it is. So I had it in photo mode.
Classic.
Yeah,
it's classic.
Okay, so let's try this again. Okay, so yeah, this I've got the FX3. This is log. Let me get focus here. This is that wonderful 35 millimeter lens, and we can even see that's the beautiful teleprompter, and it's all very gray and blah. But if I throw a LUT on, all of a sudden it's a lot prettier. So there we go. Now you can see it a little bit better. But yeah, I can toggle the LUT on and off. And this one actually has a little bit of a green tinge to it. That's kind of by design. I think it's the same LUT that I'm using on myself right now. But I can even go through and change that LUT. No.
It's important to get LUTs for your specific camera.
Yes, very definitely.
If you get the wrong LUT, it may not interpret the exposure or the color balance correctly.
Right.
You don't want that.
The ones that I'm using are from Phantom LUTs. Uh,
I love those LUTs.
this is a different one that I found that's just kind of a neutral. This one is for older S-Log3 cameras, so it's actually meant to bring your exposure down a little bit, which forces you to expose, to overexpose intentionally the way you should with older Sony cameras. Um, we've got the bleach bypass, Eastman, which I think is a Kodak film simulation, Eterna, which I think is a Fuji simulation, Vision Teal, which just looks cool. But yeah, that gives you a lot of different options to view your image and be able to properly gauge exposure, white balance, all sorts of things. There's also another thing that you kind of have to keep in mind, and this applies for both very bright situations and very dark situations. Is that your camera monitor is bright enough that it looks good in normal room brightness situations. If you are in a very dark area, especially if you're shooting log, you are going to think that your image is brighter than it actually is, just because of how bright your camera screen is. So dimming that screen as much as you can, and then using a LUT to be able to view a more contrasty image, you'll be able to gauge your exposure a lot better. If you can't, definitely pull up your histogram, definitely pull up some sort of exposure tool to make sure you aren't accidentally underexposing your image. I've had way too many times where I was photographing or filming in low light situations and thought my exposure looked fantastic, come back and it was dark as heck. So you do definitely have to be careful of that. Tyler, I'm sure you've ran into that, and in bright light too, overexposing because you thought your screen was too dark.
Yeah. Honestly, when I'm shooting mirrorless, especially, I try to use the EVF as much as possible because it's just you know you don't have to deal with reflection issues outside, and you can really see what your exposure is in the dark.
Yeah, that is the definite drawback of the FX3.
FX3.
There is no EVF, unfortunately, unless you add one. But using an external monitor with a sunshade or something like that, and just knowing that in bright sunlight you're going to tend to underexpose, you're going to tend to overexpose, and in dark conditions you're going to tend to underexpose. You just watch your histogram, watch your waveform, and do your best to compensate. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, and if you're going to be shooting a lot, 5-inch or 7-inch monitor is a really good investment. You're going to be able to see your image a lot better.
Yep, absolutely.
And you're going to be able to customize what you're looking at the way that you want it.
Yeah, especially with the mirrorless cameras, a lot of them still don't have the more advanced methods of exposure evaluation. So waveforms, parade, things like that. And additionally, a lot of your monitors are going to have functions to be able to punch in and dial in your peaking for focusing,
zebras, histogram,
anamorphic D-squeeze if you're using those kinds of lenses.
I was going to say aspect ratio control if your end product is going to have a specific aspect ratio.
Yeah, even if you're not
it's always
de-squeezing.
Better to shoot.
Yep.
It's always better to look at what you're going to shoot.
Yeah, for that special operations project, we deliberately, because we were shooting some of it anamorphic, we were shooting for an anamorphic cinemascope aspect ratio. And we learned very quickly, especially, trying to hand the camera to airmen, if they saw a full 16:9 frame, and I do this too, if I see a full 16:9 frame, I will frame for 16:9. A lot of these monitors have the ability to shade those areas, so you're only looking at that, and you can even dial in how dark the shade is. On certain ones. small HD's monitors have a lot of customizability on them.
You do. And Atomos does pretty good.
Yeah, Atomos. I generally prefer Atomos. I feel like they're focus peaking, even though it doesn't have as many control options as the small HD. It just tends to work better for me. I read it better. But I know plenty of people that swear by small HD and what they bring to the table. So I'm definitely not going to discount them as a maker. And there's plenty of other ones out there as well. But I know like you can bring in frame guides on Sony cameras, but it's just a white outline that I am very good at ignoring. And a lot of other camera manufacturers are not much better when it comes to that. So yeah, invest in a good monitor, and watch your exposure and things. But I'm trying to think. I think we covered a lot of different low light things. We didn't really talk too much about the Aurora specifically. I can pull up some of that footage real quick.
Yeah, you should pull your time lapse up.
Yeah. This is a little bit of the time lapse footage. So this one I was shooting on the FX3 with the 35 millimeter, and it was shooting at about 8 frames per second, or yeah, 8 frames per second. So we're talking a third or 3 times real time. And the thing that was cool about this, and by the way, this is literally straight out of the camera. I am playing back from the camera into the ATEM switcher with a LED applied. This is no editing whatsoever. And you can see the Aurora kind of moving around, and it's kind of cool how you can see that. But a lot of the bigger Aurora is not really moving that much, and you're not seeing as much of the rest. So I ended up switching to a 14 millimeter f1.8 and captured this at 1 frame per second. And now you're actually seeing the higher altitude purples and pinks, but that green is actually kind of frenetic now. It's very energetic and fast, and honestly, I'm not as crazy about that part, but I like the way the bigger ribbons are moving at the top. So that kind of talks a little bit about how different frame rates for video anyway really help with it. There is also I had like 3 different cameras going the entire time, and at one point I had a wide shot with the 14 millimeter going, but I saw this happening, and I'm like, dang, the next widest lens that I have is a 20 millimeter, and there's this really cool stuff happening at the top of the frame. I don't want to cut that off, and I want to still get this beautiful mountain at the base of it. So I did what every videographer with self-respect dreads and turned the camera vertical. And I did actually shoot a time lapse of this. And I'll show that here now through the magic of movie making. And this particular shot, honestly, I don't think going horizontal would have made it any better, because the composition just worked vertically. And I managed to catch it in such a way that it built up to the moment of the still frame that I shared, but it worked really nicely as a vertical. And I was like, you know what? I might as well sacrifice one time lapse to the ether of social media and give in to all of the peer pressure. I feel dirty, especially with you wearing that hat.
We'll send it to me. We'll zoom in After Effects. We'll make a really cool like pan up as the time lapse.
But yeah, so shooting the Aurora, something to know is that the reason we have all this Aurora right now is the sun goes in cycles about every 10 years. And we are currently going into the solar maximum, which means next year, this activity is going to peak and then start to taper off again until we get to the solar minimum. So we could actually see a lot more solar activity like this over the next couple of years, especially next year. Basically the next year or two, we'll see this level of activity. There's no guarantee. We may only see a little bit, but there's a pretty good chance. So, there's, if you don't have a wide angle lens, you can kind of see how 14 millimeter just shot it a whole lot better than 35 millimeters, even then though 35 gave me all that extra light. So, there's a lot of companies that make fairly inexpensive 14 millimeter lenses for full frame. Laowa just released a 10 millimeter full frame rectilinear lens, not fisheye. I might have to get my hands on that in the event of us getting more Aurora, because really just getting as wide as you can really helps.
I think Sigma. Does Sigma have a 10 or a 12 millimeter?
There's a few companies that have 12 millimeters. Canon has an 11 for full frame. Sigma, I know Sony has a 12 millimeter for full frame, both a 2.8 and a 4 or f4. They're 12 to 24 millimeters. Sigma, I'm not sure, but they did just release a new 14 millimeter f1.4, which is officially the fastest 14 millimeter lens out there, as well as I think it's a 15 millimeter fisheye f1.4 that my friend was playing with. My headphones keep falling down. I can just feel them slowly creeping backwards. Sorry about that. The joys of live recording. But Sigma, they did just recently release an ultra wide fisheye. I want to say it's a 15 millimeter f1.4 as well, which having a diagonal fisheye f1.4 is kind of ridiculous. And Drew is getting some crazy photos and footage with that. You get a pretty wide perspective, and diagonal fisheye means it fills the frame. So, corner to corner, it's giving you an image, and they really built that for astrophotography, astro landscapes and things like that. So, lots of cool lenses out there. By all means, if anyone is wanting to get into these, astrophotography, deep space astrophotography, landscapes, night shooting in general, feel free to reach out to us, ask questions. We're always happy to help.
Just say I'm not me.
I'm sure we'll get to other topics where you'll be the SME.
You keep saying that. Well, that's fine.
You know stuff. You know things.
Allegedly.
Your job description says that you know things.
Tell them. I need to know.
Okay, so we also need to get to some shoot-off news, shoot-off things in general.
The DC video shoot-off is going to be August 22nd to the 25th. But if you're coming in from out of town and you need a hotel from the 21st to the 26th, you should reach out to our team either at our Facebook or at info@dcvideoshootoff.com, and we'll get you squared away with your hotels.
Now, if you just need it for the nights of the shoot-off itself, when you go to the Eventbrite, there is a link there, and you can go to it, and you can book for the 22nd through the 25th, just right on their website, and you'll get the reduced rate. It's I think $59 a night, which is $1 more than the per diem rate, but that's a very easy justification to write up if you're putting orders into DTS. But yeah, if you need those extra 2 nights because you're coming in from out of town like I am, I don't know, Tyler, if you're going to get there the night before as well, but
Yeah.
Yes. Oh yeah, your staff. You better be there.
Yeah. Yep.
Um,
I'll be there.
but yeah, just reach out to the info at dcvideoshootoff.com. Or we're posting this to YouTube, Facebook. Um, by all means, reach out to us there. We have people that monitor the social media, and we're more than happy to answer questions, help you out. And also, if you've got questions you'd like us to answer here on this podcast, please, by all means, let us know what you want to hear about, what you want to learn. We have access to all kinds of people with all sorts of interesting knowledge that we can pull from. And of course, you got the two of us, knuckleheads, as well. We're also going to try to do some kind of weekly segments, talking about just random tidbits of information. One of the things I want to talk about is just gadgets and things that people new to production, new to photography, videography may not know even exists. But once you do, it will change your life. For me this week, I have cinefoil, also known as black wrap. And cinefoil is this great stuff that's also very good at slicing your fingers, so be careful. It is far worse than a paper cut.
I still have scars. It's a real thing.
I don't doubt it. Let's see. I'm trying to see where you can barely see it. So the whole point of it is it's basically thicker tinfoil that's been spray painted black on both sides. And that is an incredibly useful tool for shaping light. You can turn it into barn doors. You can turn it into a snoot. You can turn it into just about anything. You can tape it to just about anything and just block light. On the recent shoot that I did, there was a bottom row of lights that we couldn't turn off without turning off an upper row of lights that we wanted on. And so we just put black wrap over them so that they were shining only in the areas that we wanted to. It is a very useful tool to just kind of have in your bag ready to go. And you can, essentially block lights that you can't turn off or shape lights that you do want and do all sorts of cool stuff. I'm sure that's something you use a lot, Tyler.
Cinefoil? No.
No?
I don't. I just don't have any. It's not.
Oh.
It's not like I've used it before. It's good stuff.
Well, you need to throw that on your consumables list.
I know. We've got like 40 things of gaffer's tape for no reason. But
gaffer's tape is something I will say is definitely more useful.
All the time.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, that's something that a lot of PA folks may not know about. So why is gaffer's tape so nice?
Well, it's easy to rip and get off the spool, which is nice. Also, in most cases, it's not going to leave a residue, and it easily comes off of whatever you put it onto. But it's just useful for really whatever you need it for. I was out shooting on a flight line in Edwards a few months ago, and it gets pretty windy out there. So my
your dead cat
shotgun. Dead cat, thank you. The dead cat kept blowing off of my
or furry windscreen for the more animal conscious.
Yeah, I kept losing it to the wind,
Right.
so I took some gaffer's tape, I wrapped it around tighter, and it stopped going away.
Yeah.
I didn't have to worry about it.
It's one of those things, if you can't fix it with gaffer's tape, you're not using enough gaffer's tape.
Correct.
Yeah,
I've done ludicrous things with gaffer's tape.
Gaff tape is the best.
Made a follow focus crank.
Really? Wow. That's impressive.
It was on shitty rigs. It was clutch.
Yeah. That's probably the one thing that I won't bleep because it's part of the name is shitty rigs. If you haven't heard of that thread or hashtag, just Google it. It is a wealth of video production ingenuity.
It is as good an example of what not to do as it is as something that can be useful.
Oh yeah, no, you can. It source of humor and a source of ideas. But yeah, I mean, I always say production is problem solving, and that goes for photo as well. You're trying to figure out how to get light into a certain place or get a camera into a certain place or whatever. And sometimes it's just brute force and gaffer's tape. And if you've never seen gaffer's tape, it looks like duct tape. It's just as easy to tear, just as easy to work with, but yeah, it doesn't leave residue. It sticks to itself really well, unfortunately. So you do have to be careful about that, but you can use it to tape down cords. You can use it to, put a mark for your talent to stand on, to make sure they go back to the same spot each time. You can use it for literally just about anything. White gaffer's tape can be used for labeling.
Yeah. I used gaffer's tape and some cardboard to make a grid for a light that didn't have a grid.
Nice.
It was helpful.
Well, cool. I think that that about wraps it up for us. We have gone way over time from what I was planning on, but
forever. It's going to be like 3 hours from here on out. So
I'm trying not to, because I'm the one that has to edit this stuff.
Enjoy.
I almost said something.
Well, you got to get that like AI thing that just does it for you. Like my friend was like, "What kind of video skills should I learn?" I was like, "You shouldn't learn any. You should just learn how to use the AIs now." Why?
No,
Why waste all that time?
I'm going to keep editing, but I can throw it into a multicam clip. It's not bad. But however long the video, it takes at least twice that long to edit through all of it. So I've got about 3 hours of editing ahead of me at the moment.
I mean, you can probably take like 15 minutes of it and just
scrap it,
throw it out.
Probably.
But
we are planning to kind of keep this to about a every 2 weeks schedule. So the next episode after this one, we're looking to talk to Alex Henninger from the Army. He's out in Europe with American Forces Network, or AFN. If you've ever heard of Good Morning Vietnam, that is AFN. And he did a pretty cool story that shows how you can take your story and lead your viewer through it in a very natural way and keep them engaged. So definitely come back for that, and post any questions that you've got, like, comment, subscribe, all that fun stuff. And we will hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Peace out.